They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Sarah Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way. For 12 years, she watched the man who destroyed her life walk free, promoted, celebrated, living in a house he bought with money that should have been hers, sleeping next to a wife who didn't know what he really was, playing golf on weekends with men who thought he was a self-made success story. For 12 years, Sarah worked 3 jobs, lived in a basement apartment, watched her daughter grow up asking why daddy wasn't in the picture anymore, watched the court documents pile up, watched the appeals fail, watched justice become a word that meant nothing. And then, one Tuesday afternoon in March, Sarah made a decision that would take everything from him. Not his life, not his freedom, something worse. She took his reputation, his dignity, his future, and she did it so perfectly that he would spend the rest of his life not knowing exactly what had happened or how to stop it. What Sarah didn't expect was that revenge would cost her something too, something she couldn't get back no matter how many times she'd replayed it in her head. Welcome to the Marshall Chronicles, where justice finds its way, and sometimes it arrives wearing a face you recognize. Sarah Mitchell was born in 1982 in Seattle, Washington. Middle-class neighborhood, 2 working parents, a childhood that taught her one fundamental truth: hard work pays off. Her father was a carpenter, her mother was an elementary school teacher. Neither of them made extraordinary money, but together they made it work. They saved, they invested, they taught their daughter that anything worth having required sacrifice. Sarah took that lesson to heart. By the time she graduated from the University of Washington in 2004 with a degree in business administration, she had already worked part-time for 3 years to help pay tuition. She didn't graduate with debt, she graduated with experience, with a work ethic that showed in every reference letter her professors wrote. She landed a job at Meridian Financial Services in downtown Seattle, starting as an administrative assistant earning $32,000 a year. The company managed investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. Not a glamorous position, but the entry point to a world where money moved in meaningful quantities. Sarah excelled. Within 2 years, she was promoted to junior investment analyst. Within 4, she was a senior analyst. By 2010, at age 28, she was on track to make partner by her early 30s. She had a condo with a mortgage she could comfortably afford. She had investment accounts growing steadily. She had the life she had always planned for. And then she met Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb came to Meridian Financial in the spring of 2009 as a portfolio manager with a resume that looked almost too perfect to be real. 7 years at Goldman Sachs, an MBA from Northwestern, certifications and credentials stacked like achievements in a video game. He was hired at $140,000 a year to manage the firm's most valuable accounts, reports directly to the managing partner. Marcus was 34 years old, handsome in the way that seemed intentional, like someone who had studied how to look successful and executed the plan flawlessly. Expensive watches, tailored suits, a Tesla he had purchased with cash. He told stories about clients he had made fortunes for, deals he had closed, risks he had calculated and won. Everyone at Meridian was impressed. Sarah was more than impressed. She was interested. Marcus noticed, or rather, Marcus targeted her with the same precision he would have applied to identifying an undervalued stock. Sarah was ambitious, she was intelligent, she was beautiful in a way that suggested she didn't think she was. She was vulnerable without knowing it. She was perfect. He asked her to coffee 3 weeks after arriving at the company, said he wanted to understand how the junior analysts thought about market trends, said he valued her perspective, said it casually, like it was no big deal, like he asked junior analysts to coffee all the time. Sarah said yes. By the end of the meeting, Marcus had positioned himself as a mentor, someone invested in her career, someone who could teach her the things that would catapult her from analyst to partner, someone who saw her potential and wanted to help her reach it. They started meeting weekly for coffee, then monthly for lunch, then one evening after work he suggested dinner to discuss an opportunity he thought might be good for her career. The opportunity, it turned out, was an evening in his apartment where the lights were low and he told her she was the smartest woman he had ever met. And she believed him because he said it with the confidence of someone who had earned the right to judge other people's intelligence. Sarah didn't sleep with him that first night, but she came close. Close enough that when he kissed her in his kitchen, she didn't pull away. Close enough that when he unbuttoned her blouse, she helped him. Close enough that when he whispered that he had never met anyone like her, she believed him because she wanted to. What stopped her was a phone call, his phone, ringing in the pocket of his discarded jacket. He ignored it, let it go to voicemail, but something flickered across his face. Guilt, fear, something that looked like calculation. The next morning, Sarah would recognize what that flicker had meant. But that night, in the afterglow of attraction and the flattery of being wanted, she didn't ask questions. She simply left his apartment believing she had met someone who could change her life. She was right, just not in the way she imagined. Over the next 6 months, Sarah and Marcus became inseparable. He introduced her to his friends from his Goldman days, brilliant men in expensive restaurants who deferred to him in conversation. He took her to a weekend in Vancouver. He told her about his childhood in Portland, Oregon, his absent father, his mother who had worked her way through nursing school to support him. He told her a version of himself that she would later realize was almost entirely fabricated. But in 2009 and into 2010, the stories seemed real because he told them with emotion, with vulnerability, with the kind of intimate detail that suggested he trusted her completely. By December 2009, he had moved into her condo. By March 2010, he had convinced her to combine their finances. By June 2010, she was pregnant and Marcus was proposing with a ring he had purchased on her credit card without asking permission, though she didn't find that out until after she had said yes. She was 28 years old. She thought she had met her soulmate. She had actually met her destruction. Sarah's daughter Emma was born on February 14, 2011, Valentine's Day. Marcus brought champagne to the hospital and cried when he held his newborn daughter, telling Sarah she had given him something he didn't know he wanted, a family, a legacy, a reason to become the man he had always wanted to be. 3 months later, he cheated on her. Sarah didn't find out immediately. She found out because Marcus's ex-girlfriend from Goldman called the house asking to speak with him, realized Sarah was his wife, and after a moment of awkward silence, said something that would echo through the next 12 years of Sarah's life. "You're married? He's been calling me for a month. He told me he was in an open relationship." Sarah felt something inside her collapse. Not her love, which was still entangled with the version of Marcus she wanted to believe in. Something more fundamental, her ability to trust her own judgment. When she confronted him, Marcus didn't deny it. He apologized, cried, explained but he had been struggling with the pressure of fatherhood, that he had made a mistake, that he would never do it again, that she was the only one who had truly understood him. She believed him because she needed to believe him, because she had a 3-month-old daughter and a mortgage and a life that felt too fragile to risk on the truth. They stayed together. 2011 and 2012 were good years for Marcus Webb at Meridian Financial. He managed to grow the firm's high net worth accounts by an average of 18% annually. His clients were happy, management was thrilled. In December 2012, he was promoted to senior portfolio manager and given a substantial raise. What no one at Meridian Financial knew was that Marcus was doing something else, something that existed in the margins of his legitimate work, something that would eventually create a destruction that touched dozens of lives. He was stealing from his clients. Not obviously, not in ways that would set off immediate red flags. Marcus understood financial systems the way a musician understands instruments. He knew exactly how much he could move without triggering automated alerts, how much variance could be explained as market fluctuation, How much could be hidden in administrative transfers that looked legitimate on their surface? He started small. $5,000 moved from one account to another, replaced before anyone ran a full quarterly audit. Enough to feel like he had gotten away with something, enough to make him feel powerful. By 2013, he was stealing steadily. $60,000 a month moved across multiple accounts, disguised in ways that made it nearly impossible to trace unless someone specifically knew to look for it. He used the money to buy things: a second car, designer clothing, trips that he told Sarah were business conferences, an apartment in downtown Seattle that he claimed was an investment property for rental income. In reality, the apartment was where he was sleeping with 3 different women he met at wine bars and upscale gyms, women he told variations of the same story, that he was in an open marriage, that his wife was cold and interested only in money and status. Sarah knew none of this. She was working 60-hour weeks at Meridian Financial, trying to prove herself worthy of the partnership track she had entered. She was raising Emma, who was intelligent and beautiful and required all of Sarah's emotional energy. She was trying to make a marriage work with a man who was slowly becoming a stranger. She thought the distance between them was her fault, that she wasn't exciting enough, that she had gotten too focused on career and motherhood, that she had somehow failed to keep her husband interested. She would later realize the distance
In March
was the
2013,
only honest
Sarah
thing in the
attended a client
relationship.
meeting at a restaurant in Seattle Center. The client was a retired real estate developer named Robert Chen. Robert had brought his adult daughter to the meeting because he wanted her input on his portfolio as he began considering retirement. Robert's daughter worked in accounting and had a good head for numbers. The meeting was routine until Robert's daughter mentioned something casually to Sarah while they were waiting for their appetizers. "My dad's been getting some weird statements from Meridian," she said. "Nothing dramatic, just unusual transfers that don't quite match what he remembers requesting. Have you guys done any system updates?" Sarah's first response was reassurance. "System updates," she said. "Probably nothing." But something in the back of her mind registered. Robert Chen wasn't the only client who had mentioned small irregularities. She had heard similar concerns from 2 other clients in the past month. Differences too small to worry about individually, but together they created a pattern. That night, Sarah did something she had been trained never to do. She accessed client accounts outside of her assigned portfolio. She looked at Marcus's accounts, not as a business partner, but as someone searching for something specific. She found it within an hour. The transfers were there, hidden in plain sight, small enough not to draw attention, but systematic enough that once you saw the pattern, it became obvious. $60,000 a month moved from high net worth accounts to a series of shell accounts that Marcus controlled. Sarah sat at her computer for 2 hours, staring at the evidence of her husband's fraud. 2 hours of her life where every assumption she held about her marriage, her judgment, her future disintegrated. She called Marcus at the office, said she needed him to come home immediately, said it was an emergency with Emma. When he arrived 20 minutes later, Sarah had printed everything, every transfer, every account number, every piece of evidence that proved Marcus Webb was a thief. She laid the papers on the kitchen table and asked him to explain. Marcus looked at the evidence. For a moment, his face cycled through several expressions: denial, fear, and then something that might have been resignation, or might have been calculation. He sat down across from her and said something that would define everything that happened next. "If you report this, I will destroy you." Not a threat, exactly. A statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested Marcus had considered this possibility and had already planned his response. "I will tell Meridian that you helped me, that we were partners in this, that you knew and approved it. Your career is over. Your reputation is destroyed. Your daughter will grow up knowing her mother is a criminal. Is that what you want?" Sarah felt her world contract. She had evidence, she had proof, and she had a husband who had already positioned himself to survive, using her as a shield. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Nothing," Marcus said. "You do nothing, you say nothing. You pretend this conversation never happened, and then I'm going to fix this myself. I'll move the money back, I'll cover my tracks, and we're going to move forward." "Move forward to what?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already won, who was simply waiting for his opponent to acknowledge it. "To the rest of our lives," he said. Sarah didn't report Marcus. She told herself it was because of Emma, that she couldn't risk her daughter's future on a scandal that would taint both their names, that she couldn't afford a legal battle against Marcus when he had already made clear he had resources and willingness to destroy her. But if she was honest with herself, it was deeper than that. It was shame. It was the humiliation of having been so completely fooled by someone she loved. It was the fear that if she reported Marcus, people would ask how she didn't know, how someone so smart could have been married to a thief and not realized it. So she stayed silent. For 3 months, she watched Marcus make the transfers back, moving money back from his shell accounts to the legitimate client accounts, covering his tracks with the same precision he had used to cover his theft. By June 2013, there was no evidence left. The transfers were gone, the pattern was obscured, the crime existed now only in Sarah's memory and in Marcus's knowledge that she knew. But something had shifted between them. The marriage became a performance. They spoke only when necessary. They slept in separate rooms. They smiled at the school functions and the office parties, but at home they were two people coexisting in different emotional universes. Sarah threw herself into work with a desperation that concerned her colleagues. She arrived early and left late. She volunteered for additional client accounts. She worked weekends. Anything to avoid being at home, in the presence of a man who had threatened to destroy her if she tried to hold him accountable. By September 2013, 6 months after discovering Marcus's theft, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to report him to the authorities, but she wasn't going to stay silent either. She was going to gather evidence, real evidence, the kind that couldn't be denied or explained away, the kind that would eventually force accountability, even if she had to wait years to use it. Sarah began secretly documenting everything. She photographed financial records. She accessed Marcus's personal email through a password she had observed him typing months earlier, creating a separate account to forward his messages to herself. She tracked his movements through the GPS data in his phone, which he often left at home when he went out. She found evidence of multiple affairs, names, dates, locations, evidence that Marcus had maintained these relationships not as momentary lapses in judgment, but as a systematic part of his life. She found evidence of additional theft, not from Meridian Financial, but from friends, from family, small amounts borrowed and never repaid, money transferred between accounts that didn't belong to him, a pattern of taking what he wanted and assuming he would never be held accountable. She documented it all in a secure digital file on a laptop that Marcus didn't know existed, hidden inside their home office behind the insulation in a storage cabinet. She updated the file constantly, adding new evidence, building a case against her husband that would have satisfied any prosecutor. But she still didn't report him. Their daughter noticed the distance between their parents. Emma was 3 years old in 2013, young enough that she didn't understand what was happening, but old enough that she felt the emotional absence. She would ask her mother why Daddy wasn't home for dinner, why her parents didn't kiss anymore, why her mother seemed sad all the time. Sarah didn't have answers. She simply held her daughter and promised things would get better, knowing that promise was a lie the moment she spoke it. Marcus spent as little time at home as possible. He would leave early for work and return late. On weekends, he attended golf tournaments and business conferences that Sarah suspected didn't exist. His presence in their home had become almost phantom-like, a ghost moving through rooms he no longer inhabited. And still, Sarah stayed. She told herself it was for Emma, that she didn't want to uproot her daughter, that she didn't want to be a single mother struggling on one income, that she didn't want to explain to Emma why her father wasn't part of her daily life. She told herself it was for her career, that divorcing Marcus would create complications at Meridian Financial, that someone would find out about his crimes, and her involvement, even as a victim, would taint her professional reputation. She told herself many things, but the truth was simpler and more painful. She stayed because she didn't know how to leave, because she had been so thoroughly compromised by his threat that she no longer trusted her own judgment, because staying felt like the only safe option, even though it was destroying her from the inside. By 2014, Sarah had aged visibly. Colleagues asked if she was feeling okay. Her parents suggested therapy. Her best friend stopped inviting her to social events because Sarah had become someone who couldn't pretend anymore, someone whose unhappiness had become too obvious to ignore. Marcus noticed the decline and didn't care. He had moved most of his affairs to legitimate relationships with women who didn't know he was married. He had created a separate life in the downtown Seattle apartment that Sarah technically financed through her income, but never visited. In October 2014, Marcus came home and told Sarah he wanted a divorce. Not because he had finally realized he was destroying her, not because he wanted to marry someone else, simply because he was tired of the facade, tired of pretending. Sarah's response was instinctive. She told him about the documentation, about the evidence she had gathered, about the file detailing his affairs, his theft, his systematic lies. She told him she would use it if he fought her on custody, if he tried to take Emma, if he tried to minimize his obligations or hide his income. She told him that she had kept him honest through silence, but silence could end any time she decided it had to. Marcus's reaction was unexpected. He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement, as if Sarah had just told him the punchline to a joke he had been waiting to hear. You think that file matters? You think anyone cares about an affair? You think I'm worried about you exposing financial indiscretions when I've already covered my tracks? You think you have leverage, Sarah. You don't. All you have is the knowledge that I am a bad husband. That's not a crime. That's just life. She was right. Sarah realized in that moment that her documentation was worthless. It was evidence of infidelity, which was no longer relevant to custody proceedings in Washington. It was evidence of theft that she had participated in by staying silent and doing nothing. It was leverage that had no actual power. She had been gathering ammunition for a war that the other side had already decided didn't
for custody or money, but because he capitalized on the legal process to minimize both. His attorney was smart. Rather than contest Sarah's custody request, Marcus agreed to primary custody going to Sarah while requesting 50-50 split on holidays and alternating weekends. It made him look cooperative, it made the proceedings move quickly, and it significantly reduced his child support obligations. The settlement gave Sarah the condo they had purchased together, but not the equity Marcus had accrued through his affairs and his theft. She received spousal support for 3 years. She received child support that was calculated on Marcus's reported income, which was significantly lower than his actual earnings because Marcus had learned how to hide money professionally. By the time the divorce was finalized in June 2015, Sarah had custody of Emma, a mortgage she could barely afford, and a legal bill that consumed 3 months of savings. Marcus walked away with a reduced financial obligation, no criminal record, and his reputation at Meridian Financial intact. The theft had been covered. No one had reported it. His affairs had been his personal business. His betrayal of Sarah had been reduced to a sad marriage that didn't work out. Sarah threw herself into single motherhood with the same desperation she had applied to every other aspect of her life. She worked full-time at Meridian Financial, she freelanced on weekends for a financial consulting firm, she picked Emma up from daycare at 6 p.m. and worked again after Emma went to bed. She slept 4 hours a night and called it survival. 2015 to 2020 passed in a blur of financial struggle and emotional exhaustion. Sarah fought for the promotion to partner at Meridian Financial and made it in 2017. The achievement felt hollow without someone to celebrate it with. She watched Marcus climb further at the firm, eventually becoming managing partner of his own division. He remarried in 2018. Sarah saw the wedding announcement in the Seattle Times. His new wife was a woman named Jennifer, 32 years old, intelligent and beautiful. Sarah wondered what Marcus had told her about his first marriage. Probably the same lies he had told everyone else. That his first wife was controlling, that she didn't understand him, that they simply weren't compatible. Sarah didn't warn Jennifer. She told herself it wasn't her place. She told herself Jennifer would have to learn the truth the way she had. She told herself some people just had to learn through pain. But secretly, Sarah hated herself for that silence. She hated that she was allowing Marcus to continue his pattern with a new victim. She hated that she had been silenced and was now silencing herself. In September 2020, Sarah was sitting in her office when Marcus walked past her door. He was carrying flowers for his new wife, who worked in the marketing department at Meridian Financial. He was smiling. He was the picture of a successful man in love, satisfied with his life, content with his choices. And in that moment, something inside Sarah crystallized. Something she had been holding in suspension for years finally snapped into place. Marcus had won. He had stolen from his clients, threatened his wife, destroyed a marriage, and suffered no real consequences. He was promoted, he was celebrated, he was successful. And Sarah was sitting in an office making good money, but haunted by the knowledge that justice had never been served, that Marcus had never truly been held accountable, that he would probably die believing he had done nothing wrong. She called in sick that afternoon and drove to the park where Emma, now 9 years old, was playing soccer. She watched her daughter run across the field, and she thought about what Emma would become, what her daughter might accomplish if Sarah wasn't spending all her energy processing betrayal and anger. That evening, Sarah sat down at her computer and made a decision. She would move on, but not by simply accepting what had happened. She would move on by taking the one thing Marcus had left her with leverage over: his reputation. Sarah didn't rush. She spent 3 months thinking through every detail, considering every consequence, understanding exactly what she was about to do and whether she could live with the price. She would not report Marcus to the authorities for the theft at Meridian. The statute of limitations on fraud was already running short, and her involvement as someone who had stayed silent would complicate the case beyond prosecution. Instead, she would do something more subtle and more devastating. She would use Marcus's own weapons against him: documentation, investigation, exposure. She would create a detailed record of his affairs, his theft from the firm, his manipulation of clients. She would document the women he had slept with while married to Sarah. She would gather everything she had collected over the years, plus new information she would research. And then, systematically, she would ensure that the people who needed to know found out. Not through anonymous tips, which Marcus could deny, but through careful, calculated placement of information: a call to a journalist, a letter to the compliance department at Meridian Financial, a message to Jennifer's personal email containing evidence she couldn't ignore. She would unravel him not through the legal system, which had failed her, but through the social system that had allowed him to thrive. She would burn down his reputation so completely that no amount of money could repair it. It would take years. It would require patience. It would demand that she keep her composure and her silence until the moment was right. But Sarah Mitchell had learned patience from watching Marcus get away with destruction for so long. She had learned to wait. And now, she decided, it was time to teach Marcus Webb what accountability actually looked like.